The night was suffocatingly still, the kind of quiet that amplifies every creak and whisper in a suburban neighborhood like Willow Creek. From my front porch, I could see the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows across manicured lawns, each house a silent sentinel in the darkness. I was nursing a glass of bourbon, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my gut after weeks of escalating tension. Then I heard Ida's sharp, unmistakable clink of metal against metal, followed by the low hum of a car, engine idling just out of sight. My pulse quickened. I set the glass down, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone to check the security app. The live feed flickered to life, and there she was, Margaret Hensley, the iron-fisted president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, slipping a key into my front door under the cover of night. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a violation of HOA rules, this was a crime unfolding in real time. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I lived in Willow Creek for 4 years, long enough to know that crossing Margaret Hensley was like poking a hornet's nest. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's standards, a title she wielded like a scepter. From the moment I moved in, she'd made her presence known, striding up my driveway with a leather-bound binder stuffed with regulations, her name embossed in gold on the cover. "Read it. Memorize it," she'd said, her voice clipped, her smile as sharp as a blade. "We don't tolerate deviations here." I nodded, filed the binder away, and vowed to keep my head down. My lawn stayed trimmed to the mandated 3 inches. My trash cans vanished from the curb by 5 p.m., and I even repainted my front door in the approved shade of willow mist when the HOA decreed a uniform aesthetic. For 4 years, I played by the rules, blending into the background of this pristine community. But all that changed when I decided to honor my great-uncle's legacy. My great-uncle, Robert Caldwell, was a Navy veteran who'd served in the Pacific during World War II. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left me a collection of artifacts that were more than just relics. They were fragments of his life, his sacrifices, his story. The collection included his officer's cap, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a rare Imperial Japanese battle flag, signed by his entire unit after a hard-won victory. There were also journals, handwritten letters, and a handful of authenticated enemy insignias he'd collected during the war. Experts had valued the collection at nearly $40,000, but to me, its worth was immeasurable. These weren't just objects. They were a bridge to a man I'd loved and admired, a way to keep his memory alive. I'd spent months restoring the items, working with a conservator to ensure they were preserved properly. Last spring, I built a custom display case in my home office, which faced the street but was set back behind a row of neatly trimmed hedges. The case was discreet, lined with UV protective glass and soft lighting to highlight the artifacts without drawing attention. You'd have to stand on my lawn and peer through the window to even notice it, and even then, most people wouldn't understand what they were seeing. But Margaret Hensley wasn't most people. Her reign over Willow Creek was built on vigilance. She patrolled the neighborhood daily, her white Lexus SUV prowling the streets like a predator. She'd jot down infractions in a little black notebook. Grass too long, shutters faded, a car parked an inch too close to a fire hydrant. No one was spared her scrutiny, not even the elderly widow on Maple Drive who'd been fined for planting unapproved tulips. So when Margaret's eagle eyes landed on my display case, I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. It started with a knock on my door one humid Tuesday afternoon. I opened it to find Margaret standing there, her arms crossed, her designer sunglasses perched atop her perfectly coiffed auburn hair. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite place: anger, maybe, or triumph. "Ethan," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "we've had complaints about that display in your office window. It's inappropriate. Section 14.2 of the Covenant explicitly prohibits items that could be deemed offensive or divisive." I blinked, caught off guard. "It's not in my window, Margaret. It's in my office on private property. And it's a historical collection of me great-uncle's war memorabilia." There's nothing offensive about it. Her smile tightened. I can see it from the sidewalk, which makes it a public display. That flag, in particular, is problematic. It's a symbol of aggression, and we can't have that in Willow Creek. I suggest you remove it before the board takes action. She handed me a typed notice, her manicured nails tapping the paper for emphasis. I took a steadying breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Margaret, I've read the covenant. There's no rule against historical displays inside a private residence. This is my great-uncle's legacy, not a political statement. I'm not taking it down. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she turned on her heel and strode back to her SUV, already dialing someone on her phone. I closed the door, my heart pounding. I figured she'd move on to her next target, that this was just another power play in her endless campaign to control the neighborhood. I was wrong. The next morning, I found an official HOA violation notice taped to my mailbox. It cited Section 14.2 and demanded the removal of offensive materials within 72 hours or face a due law 150 daily fine. My first instinct was to rip it up, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I sat down at my computer and drafted a detailed email to the HOA board. I explained the significance of the collection, attached photos of the display case, and quoted the covenant to show that my display didn't violate any rules. I hit send, hoping the board would see reason. To my relief, I received replies from two board members, Sarah Nguyen and Tom Bradley. Sarah, whose father had been a Vietnam vet, was sympathetic and promised to bring it up at the next meeting. Tom, a retired history teacher, asked if he could sit to see the collection in person, calling it a remarkable piece of history. I and ted him over, and we spent an hour talking about the war, my great-uncle's Ser VYC, and the importance of preserving these artifacts. For the first time, I felt like I had allies. But Margaret wasn't about to let this go. The following day, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a notification from my security system. I opened the app and watched, stunned, as the live feed showed Margaret and a woman I didn't recognize approaching my front door. Margaret glanced around, her movements furtive before pulling out a Kia master key, the kind the HOA kept for emergencies. My stomach dropped as she unlocked my door and slipped inside, her companion trailing behind. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. "Someone's breaking into my house," I said. "I have it on camera. It's the HOA president, Margaret Hensley." The operator kept me on the line as I jumped in my car and sped home, my eyes darting to the security feed at every red light. The footage showed Margaret and the other woman emerging 12 minutes later, carrying my great-uncle's display case. They loaded it into Margaret's SUV and drove off, as casually as if they were picking up dry cleaning. By the time I pulled into my driveway, they were gone. My office door was ajar, the lock splintered, and the space where the display case had stood was empty. Every medal, every letter, every piece of my great-uncle's legacy gone. The police arrived within minutes, and I showed them the footage. Margaret's face was unmistakable, as was her license plate. "She's the HOA president," I explained, my voice tight with anger. "She has a master key, but this wasn't an emergency. This was theft. The items she took are worth over due law $40,000, and they're irreplaceable." The officers were professional but grim. They took my statement, downloaded the footage, and assured me they'd follow up. As they left, I mentioned something I hadn't fully grasped until that moment. Some of the items in the collection, particularly the medals and certain documents, were technically U.S. government property on permanent loan to my family. Stealing them wasn't just a local crime, it could be a federal offense. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the footage, the audacity of Margaret's actions burning through me. How could someone justify breaking into a neighbor's home over a display case? What kind of power trip made that seem reasonable? I was still grappling with those questions when my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was a detective from the local precinct, but his tone was different, urgent, almost deferential. "Mr. Caldwell, we've escalated your case. The Judge Advocate General's office is involved now, given the nature of the stolen items. Military police will be taking over. They're on their way to MS Hensley's residence as we speak. I step onto my porch, coffee in hand, just as two military police vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac, followed by a local patrol car. Neighbors emerged from their homes, whispering and pointing as the officers marched up to Margaret's pristine colonial. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I could see her silhouette in the doorway, her posture shifting from confusion to defiance to something close to fear. She gestured wildly, her voice rising, though the words were lost in the morning air. One officer presented a documented search warrant. I later learned when Margaret tried to slam the door, another blocked it with his boot. Through her oversized bay windows, I watched the officers move methodically through her house. It took less than 10 minutes for them to find the display case, sitting in her dining room like a trophy. Margaret's face crumpled as they carried it out, her hands fluttering as if she could somehow stop them. She was escorted to a patrol car, her wrists cuffed, her designer scarf slipping off her shoulder. The neighbors' whispers turned to gasps. Margaret Hensley, the untouchable queen of Willow Creek, was under arrest. The detective called me later that day with details. Margaret had initially claimed I donated the collection for a non-existent HOA veterans exhibit. When confronted with the security footage and the lack of any record of such a project, she pivoted, insisting she had the authority as HOA president to remove violations from homes. The military police weren't buying it. Neither were the local authorities. She was charged with breaking and entering, grand theft, possession of stolen property, and most damningly unlawful possession of U.S. government property, a federal offense that carried up to 12 years in prison and fines of $250,000. The fallout was swift. Margaret's real estate license was revoked after her arrest hit the local news, her face plastered across every channel. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and I attended, sitting in the back as neighbors aired their grievances. For years, Margaret had ruled through fear, fining people for minor infractions, threatening liens, even bullying a single mother into selling her home over a non-compliant mailbox. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president, and when the gavel fell, Margaretho had been released on bail, her ankle monitor peeking out from her tailored slacks lost it. "You're all ungrateful," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I kept this neighborhood perfect. You'll see what happens when your property values tank." She stormed out, the beep of her monitor echoing in the stunned silence. My great-uncle's collection was returned to me a week later, meticulously cataloged by the military police. They apologized profusely, and I thanked them, though the VY Tory felt hollow. The display case was back in my office, but the violation lingered. I'd always seen Willow Creek as a safe haven, a place where I could build a life. Now it felt like a battleground. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. A new HOA president was elected, Saren Nguyen, who promised transparency and fairness. People started talking again, sharing stories of Margaret's overreach, laughing at the absurdity of her reign. I even hosted a small gathering to show Tom Bradley and a few other neighbors the collection, explaining its history over glasses of wine. For the first time, I felt like I belonged here. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd catch myself checking the security feed, half expecting to see Margaret's Lexus idling in the dark. She was gone facing trial, her reputation in ruins, but her shadow lingered, a reminder that power, unchecked, could turn even a perfect neighborhood into a war zone. And in Willow Creek, we'd fought our own little war and won. For now,